you've already heard straight from the horse's mouth, as it were, the utility of drones in a farming setting. I'm representing Texas A&M AgriLife Research this afternoon, and I'm here to just ask you to keep your eyes open as we're going to be ramping up our drone, what we'll call our UAV program, especially out at Bushland, but looking also for demonstration sites for the things that we figure out over time. I agree with what has been said before today very strongly, that it's just one more tool that's available for your use. I know also that one of the impediments to adopting these gee whiz technologies is whether or not it, I mean, the big one is it going to add value more than it costs me to get involved in it? And those are the kinds of things that we're going to have to take very seriously in our research programs to make sure we know how to present to you the actual risk associated with adopting technologies like this. Now, we're going to be looking at things beyond just visible imagery. We'll be looking at multispectral imagery. We'll be looking at hyperspectral, meaning lots and lots and lots of wave bands. We'll also be looking at thermal imagery, and there may be advances that we can make on your behalf and using those additional technologies. But the main thing is that we'll be keeping our eye closely on what the practical risk overcoming, risk management opportunities are within drone technologies. Let me stop there, and I'll be happy to try to answer questions later if the occasion arises.
I'm John Engelbrecht from Stratford, Texas. We farm between Stratford and Texoma. We started putting subsurface drip in, like I say, 4 years ago. We had some odd-shaped fields. Highway 54 cuts a lot of sections at a screwy angle, and we just had some places we wanted to try it out. Kind of became a believer and keep adding acres still to this day.
Bryce Howard again. I believe we put ours in 4 years ago on the drip. That's right. Last year was our first cotton crop on drip. We got a little hail and had to replant on that, but I hope I can answer some questions for anybody.
Okay, we'll just open it up for questions.
Do I have any germination issues on our soils?
Haven't had.
No, the past couple of years we've had plenty of water.
Well, but even, I mean,
Bryce, give him a mic so he could be on candid camera.
the mistake we've made when we do catch a shower during planting, I mean, our planting window's spread out. Of course, we're still mostly corn, so we've got a bigger window. When it rains, we basically take the planter to the drip field and wait. And the mistake we've made is we generally want to go in there too soon behind the rain. Also, our drip deals, we always set them up to where we can overwater them. I mean, I tied mine in from two different directions where they can bring water from other farms, and so the first deal we put up, I mean, we could turn that field black in probably 96 hours if we had to, because I was afraid of those things too. We've never gotten into that.
How deep is your tape?
How deep's my tape, Matt? 10, 12 inches, I would say.
Bryce.
We left our pivots up over our drip just for germination purposes. It's kind of screwy, but I know it can be done. So we have 3 fields that way.
Depth of the tape. 10,
Tape's
12.
at 15 or 14, 13 inches, 30-inch spacing. Emitters are on 24s.
So what it costs to put in the system per acre? Economists always got to ask these questions. I like dollars.
$1,300 an acre.
13?
How many? Let's begin.
Said
13.
13.
$1,300 an acre.
That's the sprinkler you have sitting on top of it.
Mm-hmm. He said plus the sprinkler we have sitting on top of it.
So what do you do with a sprinkler? Just leave it there just in case?
Plan this
Risk
year is to make 2 3/4 shots before we do anything with the drip to germinate.
many acres? How big is the field?
120 acres.
2,200 is his total.
It's just under the
900
circle?
is what the equip is running on that.
Sorry?
Is the drip's all the way to the point, it's a square, right? 160 acres, or you just drip under the sprinkle?
We did the drip in a circle. We had the engineers do it in a circle.
Which way, so does the drip line go, it goes straight, or does it fall?
Goes straight with the rows. We're on 15-inch rows, and we run one on top of the tape, one in the middle of the tape, one on top of the tape.
Was it an equip project?
Yes.
Would you have done it without equip?
No.
John, yours equip?
So what about the yields? You seen much of an improvement then, I assume? Or is just, where are the advantages? What's the advantages?
The yield per gallon of water is drastic improvement. The biggest surprise for us is fertilizer efficiency. We're running so much less fertilizer through the water, and I mean, they still tell me I'm over fertilizing, and the soil tests say that at the end of the year, and it still scares me to cut it back as far as we've cut. But we're last year we ran basically exactly 50% of what we ran through sprinkler fertility through the drip. So, you know, when you factor that into the cost, it makes it quite a bit more palatable.
I definitely agree with what he said. We're still messing with the frequency and things like that. Watering schedules, trying to get the most bang for our buck out of it.
Let's pass it over and pick up our fourth panel member, who's right on time. Reed started a little early. And Patrick, tell them a little bit about your operation and how long you've been in this drip game.
Okay, well, I'm glad to be here. My name is Patrick. I'm from White Deer, and I farm down there alongside my dad. We're probably about 90% dry land, but we do have a little bit of drip, and then we do have a couple of pivots. So I do have a little comparison between pivot, irrigation, and drip. I'm not sure what they've talked about yet, but I'll just give you my experiences and kind of tell you why we decided to do drip, and then I'll kind of give you some ideas on if you're really interested in it, some things you may need to think about before you start down that path. Kind of from my experience on the planning and designing of the system. And then I'll tell you the advantages and the disadvantages I've come across. There's good and bad with it, but I'll kind of tell you my experiences. But as far as the why we did it, it was a field that was row watered, and it's 211 acres. It's real long and skinny, so more of a rectangle instead of a square. So to go with a pivot, you would have a lot left out that you would not be getting underneath the pivot, being as it is a rectangle. So I didn't want to stick with the row water, so I talked to the drip folks, and I said, well, we'll go ahead and jump off and do some drip. We did it over a 3-year period. So we started back in the summer of 2011. We put in the first 80 acres, and then that produced a crop, I guess, there in 2012. And then the summer of 2012, we did 80 more acres. And then in 2013, we finished it up and did 50 acres. So we did spread it out over a 3-year period. Maybe helped a little bit on the spread our cost out, doing over 3 years, but
Was that partially funded through Equip or just?
we did get funding on through EQIP on that, and because it had been row watered, previously, so we did get EQIP funding, and I'm assuming now if you went from a pivot to drip, you probably get EQIP funding as well. I'm not positive, but you probably can do that as well. So that's something as far as the advantages of the cutting the cost, but that's why we did the drip. Some things I'll kind of tell you that if you're really thinking about it, that I wish I kind of knew looking back on the design and the planning was one thing to think about is the size of the zones you're gonna have out there. The first group we did, we ended up having a zone that covered 20 acres. And the reasoning behind this, you know, their engineers and such were planning on my well pumping 750 gallons a minute. And I don't know, we had some miscommunication somewhere because I don't pump 750 gallons a minute. I pump closer to 625, maybe 650. So they were building this design on 20-acre zones, and they said, well, you'll turn on 3 zones at a time and water 60 acres. So I turned on 3 zones, and I couldn't water 60 acres. I didn't have enough water. So I found out that I could water 50 acres. Well, I had 20-acre zones, so I could either turn on 2 zones and water 40 acres, or I could turn on 3 and water 60, but I couldn't water 50. So that's one thing you need to kind of get with the engineers and make sure they know how much water you have. And the smaller zones you have, the more flexibility on how you can water everything. Big 20-acre zones, like I said, I could water 40 acres, or I could jump up and water 60, but I couldn't get to that 50 like I wanted to. So that's one thing as far as zone size. Now the next 2 years when we did installation, I dropped back down to 10-acre zones. And that let me get to watering 50 at a time. And so I don't know, people might do 5-acre zones, I'm not sure, 10, 5. You know, you kind of talk with your engineers about that. Now some other things to kind of think about as far as the design and such is maybe we're on 60-inch centers. So our tapes are 60 inches apart. And we plant on 30s. And that kind of goes back, and I'll talk about the disadvantage of watering up a crop here in a second, but on 60s, you're gonna have a harder time getting all that water to the surface to water up a crop as if you were on 30 inches. You know, if you had tape every 30 inches. Now, if you do tape every 30 inches, so now you've doubled your cost of the tape from 60 to 30. So that's kind of something you have to think about as far as looking at the expense of it versus possibly watering up a crop. The depth of the tape would be something else. When we first started, I didn't know how deep to go with the tape. I had the installers came from Seminole. They were doing the installation. Well, in Seminole, they farm in sandy ground. It's not like the clay that we have up here. He told me I needed to go as deep as I could because he was afraid of wind erosion, blowing and bringing the tape up. And I said, well, you know, I don't have the sand and wind erosion like you do, maybe down in Lubbock, Seminole. But I did go pretty deep. I went 16 inches in that first group. Now, going back to watering up a crop, if that tape's at 16 inches, I do have a harder time pushing the water all the way to the surface. During the season, I don't see any, you know, I'm down there in the roots or going down there and getting the water, it's no trouble, but watering up a crop, deeper that tape is, we're gonna have a harder time pushing that water to the surface. So on the next 2 years where we did it, I did bring the tape up to about 12 inches, and I've had people lately tell me, well, I should have went 6 inches, 7 inches. Now, if you're at 6 or 7, I don't know, I might be a little worried about doing some tillage and getting into it at 6 inches. That's just me, so I don't know some other guys.
Equip won't fund it at 6 or 8 inches.
Okay, so I've had one farmer tell me that, and you do have standards to go by, but I'm at 12 inches and I haven't had any issues. So that's something else to think about as far as the, you know, depth and spacing of the tape. As far as the major advantages that I've seen, we'll kind of go along with water use. You know, people ask me, do I use less water? And I don't go off and say that I'm using less water as I used to, but I'm using it a lot more efficiently. So for example, when I row watered, let's say I grew 80 acres out of that 10, I probably would only row water about 80 acres during the season. That's probably what I could get across row watering, and I left the other fallow. And so now with drip, I plant the whole 211 acres. So total water usage with my drip is going to be probably the same as it was with the row water, if not more, because I'm watering 211 acres compared to in the past I row watered probably 80 or 100 acres. So I'm not using less water, but I am producing about twice the amount of commodity, if you look at it that way. So I'm using my water more efficiently, even though I don't actually use less water on total pumpage. But it is very, the advantage of using the water. I've had really good success with yields. I've had, like I said, I can use that 650 gallon or 600 gallon well and water 210 acres of half corn, half cotton, so I can, really spread that water out better than even with the pivot, especially over row watering. So that is one big advantage that I've seen. Another, and I jumped in when he was talking about fertilizer. Another big advantage is fertilizers. I don't know as far as how much I'll use less than with my pivot, but I do know that I use it and I can put it out all year and kind of just spoon feed that crop along. It's very convenient to put that fertilizer out. You just plumb it right in and put it out, and it's right there at the root zone, so it's going right to that plant. So I've seen that as a big advantage of using the fertilizer. But as far as some disadvantages go, I do have some issues, with leaks in the tape. I have some guys tell me that they don't have any leaks. Well, I do occasionally every year, probably have maybe 10 or 12 leaks that I have to go out and fix. But you'll get used to it as far as that goes. The other big disadvantage I talk about is watering the crop up, and I mentioned that earlier. As far as cotton goes, we don't want to plant our cotton very deep. So if it's a dry year, you haven't had much rainfall, and you're going to go out there and plant that seed and then try to water it up, that's where I've had the issues. I've talked about my tapes a little bit deeper than maybe others, and I'm on 60 inches, but on a dry year, I've had trouble getting that cotton to water it up. Now, my dry land background has, I'm pretty good on the experience of planting dry land where I don't have the benefit of watering anything up. So I've learned how to, try to get around watering anything up. So on the drip, I just more or less wait for a rain if I can. This year is going to be a good year because we got good rain, we got good soil, moisture profile, and I'm not too worried about it. It's just on those really dry years where comparing it to your pivot where you can just plant any time and go out there with the pivot, turn it on and water it up. So that's a big disadvantage I've seen mainly with cotton. Corn, we've grown corn on it. We also have grown some seed milo crops. I can plant those deep enough, 2 or 3 inches if I have to. I get right down to that moisture. It's just on the cotton where I don't want to plant very deep that I've had a little bit of issues.
So John, you were talking about you providing more water to the drip and push the water up for germination. Is that what you're doing?
Well, we've got, where we can, the farm's set up to run on 600 gallons, but we can actually put 1,800 in it. And so we can run more sections longer if we have to.
So you can blow it out the top if you want.
What spacing is, are y'all spacing in the drip tank?
Well, I started on 30s, but when we switched to 20-inch rows, my new one this year's on 40-inch tape.
And we're on 30s.
Your tape is 30s?
Tape is 30s.
And that's one thing I've wondered if I would just turn on a zone and leave it for a week or so and then then go to the next one, maybe you could push it up as well. When I usually run during the season, I'm just running it, you know, everything's getting watered in a 24-hour time period, so.
So what's the pressure, water pressure, to put more water?
Well, when we put more water, we just open more zones. We don't ever run over 30 pounds pressure.
What pressure are you running on your tape?
30 pounds for John.
On the tape?
And so I usually have about 30 pounds maybe at the station, that leaves about maybe 20 pounds on top end, and about 10 pounds on the bottom end, roughly.
What size tape did you use?
That is 7/8.
That's standard or size tape?
Depends on
I don't know.
Depends on how long the run, spacing.
That's the most common.
That's what the engineers figure out, not us.
I do have, the first group of tape, or the first installation was Netafilm tape, and it is, the emitters are, I believe, 16 inches apart. And then the next group of tape is a Euro drip, and I think they're 12 inches apart. So the emitters are linked differently. And that goes along to with how much each emitter is putting out. So they might be spaced out further and put out more water, and then maybe spaced closer together and put out less water. That's another engineer question.
You run all your fertilizer through the tank?
It don't matter how dry it is, but how long does it take you to get through a station? You know, like 24 hours, like a week?
I mean, you can set up and do it however long you want to do it. I have, let's see, 17 zones. And I can set up to where in 24 hours I've watered all 17. I can set it up where I water in half of it in the 24 hours and the other half next 24. It just,
So you get over more acres than you can with the,
yeah.
basically.
I mean, so that's one thing, maybe that plant knows, well, I'm gonna get a drink of water every day. Whereas, you know, under a pivot, it's gonna get a drink and then wait 3 or 4 days to get another drink. So that plant knows, hey, every day I'm getting some water.
How do you know when you have a leak?
You'll see it.
Hurry.
Like if your corn's big?
You don't worry about those.
Gonna
Just worry
say,
about it until the corn gets up. Once it shades, you worry about those next year. Generally, you can tell if your pressure drops bad on a zone, you know, you got a leak, and it don't take long to walk to find it. I mean, the zones aren't very big.
So are any of you doing that no-till? Which would, I think, create another problem, wouldn't it? Being able to see a leak if it's coming on a no-till?
They get wet. Hurry,
Are you no-tilling or?
starting to.
Are you planting flat or listing?
Sir,
Listing or planting flat?
plain flat.
Good.
I do flat, and I still do a little bit of tillage, mainly just vertical tillage. I'm not no-till yet on the drip.
What dripper are you using? What gallon per hour is your dripper?
Oh, I think one of them is 0.17. I think the other is 0.15 or 1.16.
That would be 990 tape, the bigger tape?
Well, the 0.17 is the one that has the further distance, and I think 0.15 on the closer together.
Okay. I was gonna tell you, because running long cycles during the season, the problem is it will saturate around that dripper, because even at, say at the 0.17, at 20 pounds, you're gonna be putting out about 0.22 inches, or 0.22 gallons an hour. Okay, so every 4 hours, you're looking at 9/10 of a gallon, and that water is gonna have a tendency to wanna run down channel because of gravity. So cycling through more frequently will keep that water up in the profile and keep you from making a wetted pattern that looks like a carrot and start making one that looks like an onion. We'll keep that water up in the profile, and by doing that, you'll also cycle through the field multiple times a day, which will keep the plant happier.
Yep.
John, what's your crop rotation for the no-till? You doing cotton? or-
Corn so far.
How about yours, Bryce?
Like I say, we've had them for 4 years. Last year was the first year with cotton on it. Other than that, it's just corn.
So again, are we seeing the yield increases or not? Do you think relative to the sprinklers?
Well, I say per gallon of water, yes. Drastically.
We haven't necessarily seen it outperform yet, but we are trying to adopt a quicker frequency like he was just talking about in the back there.
Are you doing 15-inch cotton too, or do you have a different,
Mhm.
okay. And I'm mainly cotton, and I've noticed the yield increase, and I kind of attribute that to on a pivot. If it's a cool year and that pivot's, keeping everything cool, and that cotton's cool with the pivot coming around, my drip, I don't have any of that. So on a cooler year, I see maybe an advantage with the drip, and that I'm not keeping that plant so cool. But on a hot year, maybe last year, you may not, on a pivot, you might be just fine as well.
Does your tape run north, south, or east, west?
East-west.
Everybody else, east, west?
Or cotton?
I don't know what yours.
North-south on most of ours.
Because the sun's down the road.
Maybe not exactly.
Does that matter?
I don't know, we should put it downhill. We got some north-south and some, I guess now east-west, so it's just how they lay it out for pressure.
What causes the leaks more than anything? Is it a rodent or?
Yeah, and we started, my guys don't like it, but we run a high rate of dimethylate at the end of the year on our flush deal, and we've stopped most of that, or I'll say that, we'll see here in a couple of weeks if we stop most of it, but last year it worked really good. So occasionally you'll have a brain fart inflicted problem, but most of them are rodents.
I'm assuming mine are rodents. Sometimes it's a really little bitty thing, and somebody told me that might be crickets in the winter getting there and make a little bit, but.
I got upset the first year I paid the bill to have the leaks fixed. And I was kind of a little testy about the bill. And then the next bill I had was to fix 4 sprinkler flats. And the 4 sprinkler flats was higher than my deal, and I knew I was done for the year. So I figured it was kind of a win at the end of the day.
If the problem is crickets, the dimethylate will fix that problem. But if you're doing, especially if you're in corn, one thing to look for is tiny little holes in the top of the drip tape. And if you look at it with a magnifying glass or digital microscope, what you'll find is you might have wireworms. And a wireworm will get down to the tape, but it'll just make a pinhole hole right in the top of the tape.
Fuzzy pin.
Hmm?
Fuzzy pin.
Yeah.
It's gonna be real
If
fuzzy.
you look at it, you can see where it's been chewed right in the middle, but it makes just a pinhole in it, leaks. But I've seen it more with continuous corn, where they have wireworms and they don't ever treat for them, and that's the problem. But they'll burrow a hole right into the tape. And they're hard to find because it is just a pinhole.
And sometimes those pinhole leaks, I don't.
Just another dripper.
Yeah, that's. Just water.
The experiment station did that at Halfway, and they had 200 on 10 acres. That was a little bit more than a drill.
Questions? Brent, what is A&M planning? You were talking about on the, as far as the thermal sensing and what kind of experiments are gonna be running on these
Well,
different types of sensors?
Our number one application in the near term is going to be in our wheat breeding program. The technology has advanced to the point where we can see differences, easily see differences in closely related cultivars on a row-by-row basis. So super high resolution stuff with simple imaging technology. So that'll be our first move, will be to accelerate our wheat breeding program. If we've got 10,000 plots out there, hand labor trying to harvest all of that and compare different cultivars, that's a big labor bill, but if we can shortcut that and find the 1,000 plots that are most likely to give us the best response or have the traits that we're looking for and don't have to invest labor in the other 9,000 plots, then you know, we will have made a few bucks on in savings there. So anyway, wheat breeding will be number one. There'll be a lot of interest in water-related, water stress and insect, both biotic and abiotic stresses, but water and viruses, et cetera. So a lot of that in the first couple of years, we'll see some advancements in it over the next couple of years. We will be moving in the direction of these same quadcopters. And there's some work in the rest of the state using fixed wing drones. We're not going to be moving in that direction, at least in the near term.
Questions for the panel?
Did you do it again?
Yes.
Well, John, aren't you doing it again? You know, you're talking about, you're just adding it. You're gonna replace all your pivots with drip?
Oh, in a perfect world, yeah, as they age out, you know, we were looking at a place just the other day, of what kind of dirt work we need to do and stuff to change one out this winter. You know, next oldest pivot on the farm, kick it out and drip it this fall.
We put it in an additional field this winter. It was Equip 8 as well. Not sure what the future looks like though.
It gotta be pretty flat, you see it too, some dirt. It gotta be pretty flat or gotta be rolling.
This one had like a tailwater pit in the corner we need to close up and just things like that to get ready for it, to make it easier.
That's a good question. though. Does topography make any difference? If it's,
That's
Will it
for the
roll it?
engineers to-
I'm gonna say.
well, I'm just saying, do the engineers have the,
It affects the size of the tape, all that, yeah.
The topography, you just use a different dripper line, depending upon the slope. If you get slope, you use a pressure compensating dripper versus a non-comp dripper. So the engineers will design according to the slopes of the field.
so you're modifying different lines of drip.
And they've also got an anti-siphon so that you can do that roll. Otherwise, the drippers become air relief or vacuum breakers. And it's with the anti-siphon, it won't suck the mud back into the dripper.
How much does that affect the cost of the system?
About 30%. Takes about 30% higher.
Because you have, the dripper is a compensating dripper, it's got a diaphragm, and once it gets to a certain pressure, it locks in the flow. So you have to have that so that you don't have any, any frequencies in the field.
But be very careful with pressure compensated drippers because up here, we have a declining water supply. If I design your system, you got 600 gallons. If I design 100 gallon a minute zones, okay? If I get less than 100 gallons, that drip system is not going to work because the diaphragm is not gonna seat and it all is just a leak because I don't have the flow and pressure to seat that diaphragm. So if you're gonna use pressure compensated, you wanna just at least double the number of zones that you might put in so that you can, because it, with a non-pressure compensated dripper, like say the dripper that you've got, I can put from a 0.14 gallon an hour up to a 0.24 gallon an hour just on pressure. On a pressure compensated dripper, it's gonna put out 0.216, it's gonna put out 0.216. There's nothing you can do to change that. It's always got to be that same flow. So you have to design thinking ahead around that.
What's the life of the tape?
According to Meryl Streep, buried polyethylene in a landfill lasts forever. Now, Freddie Lamb at K-State, he started doing drip research back in the 80s, and in all of his analysis on cost and his economic analysis, he said drip would last 10 years. Okay, but then it went 10 years, and so he readjusted the numbers at year 15 and said, okay, the drip tape's gonna last 15 years. And then he came back, and then when it got to 20 years and said 25 years, or 20 years, and now he's up to 25 years, and he finally this year replaced some of the first tape that he put in, and the original tape he put in was an old seam tape, not the tapes we have today, like the Netafim tape that's a seamless construction. And he replaced some of that, but the flows on the other tapes that he finally cleaned out 2 years ago were back up to what they were originally, so basically, we don't know. The poly's inert to everything. Except biped damage.
Except gophers.
Those are trash. He did it on 60s back then, and he wasn't so bad to go in and put another tape in between them, but he did it, you know, off a marker back then, and he just scared that he wouldn't get it done right, so he's not gonna do it, he just stays with his 60.
Yeah, the biggest mistake in the systems that I've seen fail, they failed because people got bad advice, like putting anhydrous ammonia through the drip system. Mine was one of my guys did aqueous ammonia. He thought that would work. That worked really good. 1034O, no, not in our water chemistry. You don't do that. Not knowing what their water quality was going in with manganese or iron problems. Now, the good news is most of those can be fixed, and I've had to fix quite a few of the manganese and iron issues. And that's a doable thing. What you don't want to do is like the aqueous ammonia or the stuff that's going to be very hard to get out. But as long as you stay with the professional, like Danny with the fertility, whoever your fertilizer guy is, and put in the stuff that's good for where you're at, you should be good.
How many like things you got, so that you have different kinds of fertilizers? Just one? Pretty one nitrogen, phosphate too? Just kind of one blend all season long?
No, I mean, we'll run phosphate early, and then we'll run straight nitrogen for a while, and we'll put a little teaser phosphate the last round of nitrogen at the end. But they all blend.
It's gonna have like a tank farm or something.
No, I don't.
Are you doing any chemigation?
It's all, I mean, oh, just for the bugs, or just for the critters at the end. We haven't yet, any other thing.
I mean, in the past, I keep saying I was gonna put treflan in at the beginning to keep possibly any roots out, but I've never done it. I always had something come up, and
At what rate would you do that?
I've never done it, so I need to find
You ever
out.
do that 1 ounce to the acre? That's all you need every 60 days. You went to like a permanent crop, like alfalfa, 1 ounce to the acre every 60 days.
And I've never seen any corn roots get in there, so I guess I haven't really worried about it, even though I said, well, maybe one year I'd try it, but.
And I will tell you that Treflan is not labeled for drip. It doesn't have a drip label any longer. It lost its label a long time ago, and it's the trifluralins family, the generics, they've lost almost all their labels. So if you talk to TDA and I tell them, they say, we know your guys are putting Treflan out under alfalfa or pasture grass, and it's off label, but they're not, hammering anybody on it. But the last one was I think there may be one left that has an actual drip label on it. So just be careful. Like dimethylate is labeled for drip. It's labeled for drip for certain crops, so it needs to be fit in that crop rotation so you don't get caught by TDA.
What about getting your like herbicides activated where you're just kind of full of this?
Time to sprinkle, you don't germinate near the weeds. So we don't put any pre on the drips. Haven't any problem killing things post. There's just not much out there.
So you don't put anything pre, Mark?
I don't.
You don't?
Rinse our spray then. Yeah, we do put out pre-emergent, and we'll water it in with pivot. And we put out urea too, a little bit to supplement. We don't go all our nitrogen to take.
Being with cotton, I do quite a bit of pre-emergence, and it's not as easy. I can't water it in, but like I said, I'm used to being a dry lane farmer, and I've depended on rain for that, and I just kind of moved on to drip with the rainfalls. So
I had a question. You guys have had drip up there. Where do you see your consultants and your fertilizer crop advisors in the drip knowledge window? Are they like from 1 to 10? Are they pretty well knowledgeable about drip? Are they still learning? Are they experimenting? Where they at? Where's the gap? Where is there?
I'd say my guy's probably a 5.
Okay.
He knows a little bit, but there's things he tells me, and I tell him, no, that's not. You know, he thinks he might know more than he does, but he does know a little bit.
I think ours are learning just like we are. We're all kind of working through it, going to as many of these as we can go to.
Yeah, mine's on the same learning curve I am. We do quite a bit with the moisture probes and the learning the differential between the sprinkler irrigated and the drip irrigated. You know, from a probe standpoint, it's taken us a while to kind of get our hands around, but it's you know, that's where you see the difference in the water patterns and things, and so, you know, he's coming along with us.
Use your probes on both.
Up here, what Danny was saying during his presentation about the flea hoppers, at first square, 2 ounces of picks and stuff for flea hoppers, and then 2 weeks later do it again, because you can't scout the flea hoppers and they're there. So just kill them, just plan on doing that every year, and it'll be gangbusters ahead, because you'll set those first few balls. With the flea hoppers out there, you're gonna lose the first 2, 3 to 4 balls.
Okay, I got about one more question for the panel. And you guys working on